I've got about 15 minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's just awful seeing those people rushing Gaza, rushing and trying to go over the fences and all being, shot and stuff. and then the Israelis saying, we've got to defend ourselves. They're chucking missiles at us, so they're supposed to be the victims of all this. And, just sort of
Yeah. I'll repeat the question a bit. So in the news, we see scenes of conflict at the borders between Israel and Gaza, whatever. Israel saying it has to defend its borders. I mean, what's been happening the last few weeks? The Palestinians have been threatening to rip down the fence and come back home. Well, no. Israel's not going to have that. But we're hearing it on the news that Israel is defending its border. Actually, there is no border between Gaza and Israel. It's never been agreed. Gaza is just that portion of Palestine which Israel pushed a whole lot of people into and turned it into an outdoor concentration camp. The city of Jaffa, depending what language you speak, in 1948 it was 120,000 people, one of the largest cities in Palestine. 3 weeks later there were just a couple of thousand people there, and the rest had been put into camps with barbed wire around them and then were driven, forced down to Gaza, as were most of the others. So these are not people from a place called Gaza wanting to attack a place called Israel. These are Palestinians who have been pushed out of Palestine into a tiny corner. It now has, even when I was there 20 odd years ago, the Al Jabaria refugee camp, that was a slip, had it was probably 38,000 people per square kilometre. And it's just unreal how the conditions, the sewerage doesn't work. So you know what that means, and so on. 50% of the Palestinian population is under 15 years of age. They're all going to have babies. Okay? This is only going to get worse. So, but it's being, so we see Israel claiming it's defending itself, but it's actually enforcing something which is illegal. It's not defending itself. Every time there's a war with Gaza, there'll be the number of Israeli casualties I could count on one hand, and it's usually they've shot themselves, shot each other by mistake, and the number of casualties in Gaza will be thousands, because it's asymmetrical. I mean, the technology is phenomenal. The Israelis will now phone the house they're going to bomb. So they'll ring up, you answer the phone. Just giving you a warning, we're about to send a missile to destroy your house. You need to get everybody out of your house into safety, please. And one family heard about this happened, and they started getting out, and they're almost out of the house. The phone rang again. They went back, and there are still people in the house. Would you please get everybody out of the house? We're waiting to destroy it. This is what the Gazans are living with. And it's not much better in the West Bank. We just don't get the headlines in the West Bank. It's very high tech, and the high tech has become phenomenally sophisticated. And in one sense, I guess, is this the kind of world, it won't just be Israel and Palestine, is this the kind of world we want to live in 50 years' time? Where people like us live comfortable lives with lots of technology and wonderful surgery for our cancer and all the rest, and the other half of the world, or the other 3/4 of the world, or 80% of the world, lives basically with rising sea levels, in poverty, with no opportunity and no prospects of ever succeeding in anything. So structural conflict. So this is a parable. If we don't get this right and solve it, it's going to become a prediction of what our world will be like in many ways.
What's the economic base of the people who live in Gaza? Where does the money come from?
There's a certain amount of income just from interactions with each other, but there are large amounts of money come in with foreign aid, through United Nations, and at different times, countries like America and others have provided aid. It very much went pear-shaped for Gaza when they had the temerity of, they had a free election and they elected Hamas. And America said, no, I'm sorry, that's not an outcome you can have. well, if you have a free election and they happen to elect the people that we don't like, we then say, no, we're going to cut your aid and put you under blockade and so on. So the Gaza microcosm itself is a catastrophe. The groundwater is poisoned. It's going to be. They're now saying that Gaza will be unlivable, unfit for human occupation within a few years, which is the earth in miniature.
The role of Hamas. It seems to me that both Hamas and the current Israeli government have quite short-term objectives, and they find each other useful.
Yep.
And so if Hamas was to either change its approach or disappear, would that be helpful?
Let me go back a little bit. One of the problems is that generally speaking, the Palestinian political leadership has been quite ineffective and ineffectual. It's also very corrupt. No, that's not new. I mean, welcome to the Middle East. Count the number of Israeli prime ministers that end up in jail for corruption, including one who's still in power but will probably be in jail in a year or two's time. So corruption is endemic in these kind of violent societies where lots of money washes around and the protocols for managing the accountability are not exactly robust. So Hamas is partly flourishing because it's capturing the discontent and the frustration that it's been, 20 years since the Oslo agreements have been signed, and what have we got out of it? Life hasn't improved. In fact, if anything, it's got worse. But in the meantime, in that 20 years, every Palestinian kid has a smartphone and can share videos, and they can see how life is like on the other side of the fence. So, the knowledge of the disadvantage is becoming more in your face. So Hamas is, yes, it's extremist, it's violent, but then so is the Israeli government, and so were so were the irregular Jewish militias who drove the Brits to the point of getting out, because the death toll of the destruction they couldn't manage. So those terrorists have become the government, and they're respectable with the passage of time, like Begin and others, Menachem Begin. And the current terrorists, who are actually acting perfectly legally, Palestinians have a right under international law to resist occupation, because the occupier doesn't like it, and they will fight back or whatever. If Palestinian civil society could be strengthened, and if the Palestinian population could get a sense that there was some hope that the peace process had prospects of delivering for them, then support for Hamas goes down. And so Hamas, also for that reason, once you're in power, you don't want to lose power. So people leading Hamas don't really have an investment in any outcomes that are going to cause them to lose their control over their people and to lose their capacity to live a good life until they get assassinated. So the incentives aren't really there in Hamas, and the PLO leadership with Mahmoud Abbas, who's mid-80s and very unwell, so there's no energetic, vital kind of leadership. The person who in many ways would galvanise the Palestinian community is in jail on trumped-up charges, and Israel's never going to let him out. That's Marwan Barghouti. And he's like the Nelson Mandela figure. Now, if there's ever a bit of a change of heart and Barghouti is released and there really is a democratic election, because they've been cancelled for the last 10 years or more in the West Bank, then he would win hands down, according to what people are saying. But Israel, just as Hamas has no deep interest in making peace, because then there'd be no need for them to be bullies, Israel has no interest at all in a strong, robust Palestinian civil movement, civil society. They don't want a Palestinian Nelson Mandela to emerge. If they can keep the Palestinians fighting each other and laughing all the way. So projects that actually build trust, projects that build goodwill, to give people experiences of working with the other, because most Israelis would rarely, generally speaking, most Israelis would have very little day-to-day contact with the Palestinian, except that on their illegal settlements, who do they get in to build them? They get local Palestinian people to build their illegal settlements on Palestinian land. But those people have to park their car outside in case it's a car bomb. They get bussed into the work site and they must leave at the end of the day, and there's no interaction with them during the day. They're classic migrant worker kind of model, like the Mexicans in California and so on, that sort of social model. Okay. So we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and we pray for particularly moderate voices in the Muslim community, within the broader Palestinian community, and we also pray for moderate voices. I mean, the left, so-called left wing, centrist and left wing side of Israeli politics are very weak at the moment, because the Israel has a proportional representation system where it's a bit like our voting for the Senate. So you get lots of micro parties. It tends to have electoral system doesn't generate clear two-party kind of results. So you end up with nobody having a majority. I think Netanyahu's currently in coalition with about 6 different political factions to get the bare numbers needed. And of course, in principle, although there are several Palestinian people in parliament and they're the second or third largest party, no Israeli Jewish political party will ever form a coalition with the Palestinian members of parliament. So that's not going to happen. They'd rather see the right wing in power than the left wing form an alliance with the Palestinians. So the political system is broken as well.
And the American influence?
I'm not sure that America has influence. I mean, America's influence within Israel itself, I think, is pretty minor, because Israel is protected. So America's primary role is that it protects Israel from international criticism. And so one of the conditions imposed on the Palestinians until recently was that they would not lodge any complaints with the International Court of Justice or the International Court of Human Rights. Otherwise, the Americans will stop giving the Palestinians financial aid. Now, the underlying fear there is that if Israel is found guilty, as it almost certainly would be, of war crimes, crimes against humanity, because of how it's treating children on the West Bank and Gaza and so on, then Israel would be expelled from the UN. And America has no veto in the International Court of Human Rights and International Court of Justice and under the Rome Treaty. So America doesn't want Palestinians going there, because that places the conflict outside America's veto. Whereas if it happens through the UN, A, nothing will happen, and B, America can of course, as it has done, exercise the veto to protect Israel. So much is going to depend on the realignment of great power relationships as Russia is resurgent, China is resurgent. America's capacity to dominate may become less useful to the Israelis. And Europe is emerging as a critical player in all this, because Europe has in place regulations which require trade bans when certain kinds of actions occur. And so European financial institutions are now banned under European law from investments in certain Israeli projects because of the Israeli treatment of the people in the West Bank. So the economic pressure from Europe may end up actually having more of a role in changing Israeli outlooks than the American process of sort of running protection. Basically, America allows Israel to decide what it wants to do. And we know what Israel wants to do. It wants to leave things as they are. The Europeans are pushing Israel to change, to treat the Palestinians differently. And so as Trump tears up the goodwill between Europe and the US on a number of different levels, we may find the European community is start to be a bit more proactive in terms of recognising Palestine and putting trade barriers on Israel, which would hurt the hip pocket nerve within Israel itself. So it's a long and complex and wicked problem, and it's basically something we've created through the imperial machinations of the last couple of 100 years. Because at the time it seemed like this would be a good idea, and it would be good for London or good for Paris or good for whatever. And we're exactly 100 years from the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, the end of the First World War. My view is we've not yet got to the end of the transition period. We're still in the mess following the breakup of the Ottoman Empire.
Well, we had the Berlin Wall.
Yeah. Small bickies compared with the Middle East, it seems. Yeah. And of course the Cold War didn't help for 20, 30 years when Russia and America were not going to do anything together in the Middle East. And that also allowed Israel to position itself as the West's special friend in the Middle East, and supposedly the only democracy in the Middle East. Well, as the Israeli newspaper Haaretz said the other day, the only true democracy in the Middle East is Jordan, because in Israel half the voting population is excluded. And of course what's happening in Turkey is not exactly an exercise in democracy, and Egypt and you name it. So Israel is not the only democracy, but it positions itself that way. Okay. Well, thank you. I hope that was helpful and not too discouraging.